Hey, so the first step is to find out what your primary problem is, right? So basically, the person who wins in a 1 versus 1 game of StarCraft is the person who has the larger... I mean, obviously, composition is important and all that other stuff is important, but like big broad strokes are important. But the most important thing is who has the biggest army at the moment when you guys engage, because in most games of StarCraft come down to one big win or one big loss that screws you or your opponent for the rest of the game. So our goal is not necessarily to always have a big army, but to always have a big army during the first fight. So if we get to choose when that first fight is, then great. We can do things like fast expand and have a tiny army until the first fight. But if we're defending, then we need to have a big army whenever he happens to poke into us. So right here, obviously, this is already pretty bad. We've lost some stuff for no reason against the normal poke that Protoss will always do. So one of the general rules of PvP is you have to have either a Marauder with concussive shells or a bunker at the front of your base by 5 minutes, because there's always going to be a Stalker poke at 5 minutes. And yeah, so you didn't have either, so that poke did a tiny bit of damage, but that's not super important. So anyway, what we want to do is fast forward to the point at which this game was over, and then look at who had the bigger army, you or your opponent. And then we'll compare your army not only to your opponent, but to just a standard army at that point in time. So it looks like your opponent is doing some sort of just pokey aggression, like 5-gate robo with a Nexus. Very weird. You've got your medevac out pretty quickly. It's 10 minutes, and your army is reasonably large, but you're one-basing at this point. So you kind of need to win right now or you lose, because, you know, one basing versus two bases. So this army was way too small and he easily crushed you. Let's look at the numbers. Looks like you did a 10-minute attack. Fight happened just around 10 minutes, and your opponent's army is, your opponent's army spending is 3,100. Actually, let's wait till this shows up, right? So 3,400 at 10:30, and he also doesn't have any ups. So 3,400 is very standard. That's what you should have had. And your army spending is 2,900 plus 2 is 31 plus nothing. You got no infantry upgrades. So it's 31 to 34, right? Actually, he's got warp gate, so he's got 35. So 31 to 35, you're 400 down. And on top of that, I mean, one of the things about is also you can only count units that are locally here, right? So even though you spent close to the right amount of money, a lot of it was this bunker, this tank, these two Marauders, this Marine, and they weren't actually in the fight. And actually, things that are building count too. So 2 tanks that aren't in the fight, 1 medevac that's not in the fight, tons of Marauders that aren't in the fight, tons of Marines that aren't in the fight. So in the actual local engagement, the size of this army is actually quite small. This is 600, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. This is a $1,400 army. $1,400 for you, $3,400 for him. So he's got almost 3 times your army size. So even though Zealot, Stalker, Sentry, Immortal is kind of a crappy composition versus Bio, like he should never win a fight against your composition if you have the same size army as him, you don't have the same size army as him. Your army is 1/3 the size of his. So it's not even close, and he just usually crushes you. And not only that, because you one-based against the two-baser, now you had to win before like the 11 or 12 minute mark, or else you're way behind, and you didn't win, and so now the whole game is kind of blown. So now we go back and we say, okay, why did you only have $1,300 against his $3,500? And you can do this in every game you play. So first, did you have enough workers throughout the game? Did you get enough money? So first we say, did you get enough money? Then we say, did you spend it? And then we say, did you get the stuff you spent it on into the fight? Right? So at 6 minutes, we're looking for 24 workers. You have 22. You're 2 workers short in your supply block, so you're already 2 workers behind, which at this point is about 10% economically behind. So then we're going to go up to 8 minutes, and you should have 30 workers at 8 minutes. You have 27, so you're still 3 workers behind. Not terrible on workers, really. 9 minutes, we're looking for 33, and you're at 30. But at this point, you're maxed. You're fully saturated on one base, so being behind on workers after about 30 is doesn't really matter. So you did cut workers from 8 minutes to 10 minutes, but it doesn't matter because you still got a fully saturated base back home. So economically, it looks like you got enough money. So that's the first thing. And that's the easiest thing to fix, right? If you're not getting enough money, well, that's easy to fix. Just make workers and don't supply block. Bam, you fix that. But it doesn't look like that's your problem. It looks like you are getting enough money. So the next thing is, are you spending your money? Are you constantly using the buildings that you have to produce units? And we can see that at the point, at this 10-minute mark when you're pushing, you don't have any extra crap queued up, but you do have $1,400 just unspent in your bank. So that's a huge deal. Like I said, the whole game of StarCraft comes down to, do you have a bigger army in the local engagement when you fight the first big battle? So that means you should never ever fight the first big battle unless you've spent every penny and you have nothing queued up and all of the army units you have are there. So in this case, if you have this money in the bank, don't go. And I know that you're one basing against two basing, but those are two competing ideas, right? One base versus two base means I need to go before a certain time, so I need to go before 13 minutes or I lose, right? But the second thing is I need to spend all my money or else I lose. So there's no good solution here. Like, you didn't spend all your money by the time you had to go, and so you went anyway. So you're just gonna lose. There's no, like, if you pull back and stay home and try to beat him later, that would be a much better option than doing what you did, but it wouldn't have worked out for you because he's got a bigger income than you, and he's going to continue to have a bigger income than you for a long time. So when you one base, it's extremely important to be completely crisp with your build, and to make sure that you hone your build to a point where you can spend every single penny by the push mark, by the push point. So this specific build that you're trying to do, the 2-1-1, which is what I do, you're doing completely wrong. You took your second gas way too early, so you didn't have enough minerals early on. You supply blocked early on, and you didn't get the tech lab, you didn't get a marauder, you didn't get concussive shells really early, you didn't have a bunker at the front early enough. And now this building is idle, and this building, because of their supply block, is also idle. This building is now idle, this building is now idle, they're both idle, this building's still idle, this is idle. So basically, to do this build properly, none of your buildings can ever be idle for the entire first 10 minutes of the game. And because of multiple supply blocks, a lot of your buildings were just idle. So, and this is a great thing to work on, because this is something you can do against the very easy AI. And it's a really easy thing to benchmark, right? What you do is you play a game against a very easy AI, and you go to 10 minutes, and then you pause the game just by hitting F10, and single player that pauses it. And you say, do I have 100 supply? No, I have 66. So I'm 34 supply behind. I obviously made some huge mistakes. I'm going to start over. And then you do it again. Do I have 100 supply? No. And then you do it again. Do I have 100 supply? No. Do I, over and over. And then you can perfect the build before you take it onto the ladder, and you can really make sure that you're doing it absolutely perfectly. I'm sure that I have videos already out there explaining the build just fine. So I won't go over it again unless you want me to. I'll just try to dig up a link. Anyway, this is the next TVP.